Well, once again, I am very delighted and excited. Hey, that kind of rhymed. I'm delighted and I'm excited to have another wonderful guest on the show. Our guest today is Dr. Olivia Ratcliff-Totty. Hi, Liv. How are
Hello.
you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Liv is the primary therapist at Element Q Healing Center and many more things, which we'll hear as the show goes on. Welcome to the Element Q podcast. I'm your host, TJ Woodward, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for this empowering journey. Each week, we shine a light on the authors, thought leaders, therapists, coaches, and healers of all types who are making a difference in the LGBTQ plus community. Together, we honor those who came before us, the courageous and resilient trailblazers who stood for our rights and recognition. Their strength laid the foundation we stand on today. Here, we celebrate their legacy by diving into the stories, insights, and tools that inspire gentleness, healing, and transformation. So get ready to be uplifted and empowered. This is the Element Q podcast. Welcome, and I'm very much looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and appreciate just the space.
Yeah. And the importance to me of the conversation of what is required to create deeper healing within the LGBTQ plus community. And I know that you just finished facilitating a conscious recovery group at Element
I did.
Q, and your topic was creating safety and rebuilding trust. And when you and I were talking before we hit record, we were talking about, you were saying that one of the most important first steps or an important step of healing is self-acceptance and acceptance from family. And then I said,
Mhm.
what if you don't get acceptance from your family? So I'm wondering
Mhm.
what your thoughts are about that.
I think that's something that can be just very heartbreaking, right? Of like family not accepting you for just who you are, right? As a true human being. And something I think of with self acceptance, right? And when you don't get it, right, from the people who you're supposed to, I really think of like creating your chosen family,
Mm,
right? And so finding people, finding spaces that you can start to develop that really ingrained and innate trust and understanding. And I think as more people within a chosen family accept you, right, the more that you may be able to start accepting self and knowing that you do deserve to take up space, right? And
mm.
so I just think a lot about, if there's rejection from family, right, finding your chosen family.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing you
Yeah.
saying too is it's kind of like this dance between the inner acceptance and the finding communities where we can get external acceptance. And when I
Hmm.
think about safety and trust, I identify that as the important first step for either recovery or our wellness journey, our healing
Yeah.
journey. And a lot of times it does start externally, and then ultimately we move into
Hmm.
internal safety.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I think it's an interesting balance. I think a lot about intersectionality, right? And how sometimes that is very like it's ever changing, right? Some of the aspects of those intersecting identities. For example, I am a black and white cisgender female, right? My mixed race identity is not necessarily going to change, right?
Yeah.
Unless I change my skin color, but I'm not planning on doing that, right? But there,
There are those who have, but you're not going to
yes,
be one of
yeah,
them. That's
right.
right.
Right. But there are some of these identities that I think we hold that are very much so like we see them, right? They're there and in the open, right? And when I think about trust and creating safety is allowing parts of our identities to change,
Hmm.
right? And when they change, knowing that there may be more of having to understand the self and how we may show up differently, right? For example, something I think a lot about is um, whether it's mental health, right? Maybe a new diagnosis is added, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so, how do you shape this new identity, right? Given this information you have. And sometimes it's as simple as like when I think of sometimes ability, right? Right now, I am able bodied, right? I, you know, could walk out of here and then break my leg. And that could change something about my intersecting identities, right? And so I think there is a fluidity, and then just knowing that like throughout life we shift and we change. And so knowing how to create safety for ourselves with the different identities that we hold, right?
Yeah. And there's another piece that I think is so important, and it's a
Mhm.
very nuanced conversation because even my idea of an identity has changed over time. Like what it meant to me to come into my own in my early 20s, and like, what does it mean to be a gay man? And like,
Mhm.
part of it was at that time in that place, things have changed. And it's
Right.
also that I've started to wear that identity differently. There were times I wanted to reject that identity. There were times I wanted to have that be like the one and only primary identity. Like it was so central to who and what I am. And I remember my first mentor saying, spiritually, there's no such thing as these identities. It's what we have, not who we
Mm.
are. And I got so activated. I was like, you're trying to tell me that I'm not a gay man. And I mean, I remember just getting so activated. And I look back now and I realize what she was saying is, yes, this is an identity. And there's also something truer beneath that. And we can honor both. It's not about
Mhm.
abandoning, but I was so defended at the time. And I'm curious
Mhm.
at your own journey, like, has it changed for you? And certainly if you think about the clients we have, from like
Yeah.
even day one to day 90, how they have a different relationship with all these different intersecting identities.
Absolutely. And I can understand, like, you're meeting with, and you heard that, like, it's spirituality there. That's what it is, right? Of like,
Yeah.
really challenging those ideas. And, there are so many of my identities that are consistently changing, right?
Mhm.
And I think, accepting that, I, for the longest, I didn't realize, right, that that I was bisexual for a very long time, right? I was just like, oh, they're really cute, they're really pretty, right? Like, interesting, right? Like it was this admiration, right? But
Mhm.
then as I, expanded my world, right? I moved from Ohio to San Diego for school. And then I was like, oh, maybe it's more than admiration, right? Maybe I also like women, right? And so I think that was a very big identity that changed for me. And then just having that acceptance, right, from myself, right, and that trust and like this is what aligns for me, right? No matter how someone else may look at it, right? Trusting self of like this is my lived experience. And I even think too of like even the shift of identities from being a student, right, to being a practicing full time clinician, right? There's differences. And so having to step into those roles, right? And yeah, so I think there's been a lot of shifting within my identity.
We were talking about, the title doctor before we
Uh-huh.
before we started the show, and I was sharing with you
Hmm.
that I was on a Zoom and this client kept calling me Dr. Woodward, and I kept saying, I'm not a doctor. And then finally, after the third time, I'm like, well, if that's how she needs to see me, I'm just gonna let her roll. I'm just
Right.
gonna roll with it. And so like sometimes these identities are like also projected identities, like for
Right.
whatever reason, because she had read Conscious Recovery and she
Hmm.
really wanted or needed me to be a doctor. And I thought that was very interesting. And I mean,
Yes,
also in your journey, you are a doctor. And how
for
has
sure.
that been for you? Like becoming that as part of your identity?
Yeah, you know what? Like I said, I'm still stepping into it,
Yeah.
right? It's this journey that took a long time. And now that I am, have that title, it's just a really beautiful and also like acknowledging the privilege that I hold of like having that education. And I want to use that privilege, this title, to better serve communities that do not have as much privilege, that are oppressed, that are in really, just in these systems, right, that are created to continue to keep them in the system, right? And so I think it's a very, that title, doctor, right? Like I want to use it, to help others.
Yeah.
And I think also just like there aren't, in the world of psychology, there aren't a lot of Black psychologists, right? And so I really am passionate about showing others that like you can do this, right? You deserve to be in some of these roles and to have these titles. And so it, it's something that's really important for me to, as having this title, to give back to others.
Yeah, because if I think about a client coming into treatment, because I've, been
Hmm.
also very curious about that in the sort of mental health field, that we do
Yeah.
have less people of color, in particular Black people, in particular Black
Hmm.
men and women, like, that
Hmm.
are rising to
Hmm.
the top and being
Right.
psychologists, psychiatrists. Obviously they exist, but in disproportionately small numbers. So, I mean, we could
Yes.
talk about the why of that, but I really want to
Yeah.
lean in a little bit more to like, what is the experience like for someone who walks into either treatment or a support group? If they don't see someone they perceive looks like them,
Hmm.
what is that experience like? And what can we do? This is a big
Hmm.
question, I know, but what can we do to start to shift that? There's a lot there.
Yeah. I think it starts with things like this, right? Podcast, right? Of just like people having access to, wherever they are, of like, oh my gosh, right? I'm seeing someone who looks like me or has similar identities being reflected right now. And I also think about my own experience working here at Element Q. Like on my first day, I'm walking into the room and there are clinicians here clinicians and other staff, right, who hold very differing, beautiful identities, right? There's such an array. And there's also people of color, right? And so I imagine that my experience of seeing that, right, like with other people who I work with is very similar to, someone coming into treatment and seeing someone who may hold a similar identity, right? It may not be that someone is, exactly the same, right? Black and white, bisexual, things like that. It may be like, oh, there's like a person of color, right? Oh, there's someone who has curly hair, right? Um, and so I think that for sure, but also holding that, everyone's experience is very different,
Mhm.
right? And so wanting to also hold to prevent any assumptions or things like that too.
I think it's so important that you're saying that because I hear people say things where there's an assumption that all people of a certain race or a certain ethnicity or a certain, sexual orientation have the same experience. And we know that
Right.
isn't true, at least
Right.
intellectually. And yet there might be a tendency. I mean, like one of the things that I think about just as a gay white man, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I think about people assume that we have this shared experience, gay men, for example,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that may or may not be true, for
Right.
me or for someone else. And like we can be
Yes.
inquisitive about that or we can be curious about it. But I think what you're saying, and it's important to acknowledge that I don't want to make an assumption about the person sitting in front of me. I want to be
Mm-hmm.
curious about the person sitting in front of me.
Absolutely.
I think about my husband who's mixed race, but like
Mm-hmm.
culturally, he grew up very Filipino and yet he's pretty
Mm-hmm.
dark skinned. And people will
Mm-hmm.
often assume things about his culture that
Yes.
he did not he grew up in
Right.
Hawaii in this big Filipino family and
Mm-hmm.
a Latino stepfather. So like
Mm-hmm.
how people perceive him based on how he looks is really different than his life experience. And I know I've watched where people make assumptions about him, and I can see, for him that navigating that is really
Mm-hmm.
fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's very difficult, right? And I think of the more like I think of um, identities that are more targeted versus ones that are not as targeted, right? So dominant versus targeted. And how like the more like targeted identities you may hold, the more that may come up, right? So for example, um, a trans woman who is also a person of color, right? Who maybe like the more targeted identities, right? Sometimes the more it's like having to kind of parse out, right? Of like what is coming up, right? Especially when there are assumptions made about what you should or should not be doing, right? And so it can be difficult, right?
Yeah.
When there's a lot of identities, even like mental health, right? There's some disorders that may be more widely accepted in comparison to others, right? And so just having to balance a lot of that, a lot of the misperceptions.
Yeah, and just misunderstandings, right? Like what
Yes.
it means. Like if you hear someone saying, psychotic or psychotic features, like there's a fear around that in some
Hmm.
circles, right? And even if we even think about drilling into like calling it a disorder or calling it mental
Right.
illness, right? Like I
Right.
don't want to look at someone as being ill or disordered. That's my own lens. I want to look at them beyond that diagnosis, but also
Hmm.
honoring that that's been part of their experience. I'm curious, as we're talking about all of these different intersectionalities and these different layers, how do we help? How do we start to help create deeper healing? Because it's one thing to acknowledge these, and I know that's the first step because I
Yeah.
remember my friend, and very well meaning, but he heard me speak one time and he's like, I finally get it. I was like, because he's a cis white straight male, and
Hmm.
he was like, we've all been bullied. I was bullied too. I had these things. And then he heard me speak and he's like, oh my gosh, I get it at a deeper level. Like every day,
Mm.
someone was looking at you as being defective in some way, like inherently broken. And I never got that. And so I think the awareness is a first step, but how then do we move into deeper healing?
That's a great question. And, I think there is some nuance to like it'll look different for everyone, right? Which is, kind of hard to digest, right? I think there's a lot of that, like we want to have an answer for
Yep.
every single thing. But I think sometimes it really depends on what the person is going through, right? And I think moving into that deeper healing, at least from the perspective of a clinician,
Mhm.
is, looking at a person for all of their qualities, right? Not learning only the things they're struggling with, but what do they really like to do, right? What makes a person that person, right? What are their unique qualities, their strengths, the things that like light them up, right? Like I think really leaning into some of those things can really start and initiate some of that deeper healing, of just like not say someone has a certain, identity. Maybe that's not the focus, right? Maybe just like learning who the person is in all aspects of their life. And I think that allows for like a deeper understanding within the clinical relationship, but then also a deeper understanding of self, of like, you don't have to just be one thing, right? You can be really sad, but you can also be really good at roller skating, right? Like you can be really many things at once. And so I think just really seeing the person as a whole person instead of just like how people have labeled them, right? Or some of those like narratives that have been created for them.
Yeah, and I want to take what you're saying and move it even a little bit deeper because what you're saying is so important.
Mm-hmm.
Do I view someone as being incapable of healing? Do I view
Mm.
someone as not being strong enough or ready? And there's a nuanced conversation there because we want to honor a person's life journey. But I have sat in certain circles, we'll just leave it at that, where people, because of their different life experiences, maybe are viewed as being incapable or not ready. We hear that a lot in the field, like she's not ready to address her trauma. They're not ready to do this yet. And of course, I always come in and say, what if they are? I'm not saying they
Mm.
are, but I want to be in the what if. So, like,
Yeah.
beyond the identity, and if I have an assumption about a person because of their race, their sexual orientation, their gender
Mm-hmm.
identity, that they may have this certain life experience and not be ready yet. I mean, I think about a lot of the narrative we have around our trans folks that, of course, we want to honor and validate and know that that's a true experience for many trans folks, if not most or
Mm-hmm.
all. And yet, I don't want to keep a person stuck there, right? There's something
Right.
within them that can also heal. And I've had
Mm-hmm.
pushback strangely in all kinds of different circles on that very idea.
Mm-hmm. I think that's where taking a collaborative approach to therapy really helps, right? Because in that, we're able to hear what is the person saying, right? What is the person struggling with? And then using that collaborative approach, like how can I meet the client where they are at and acknowledge the things that they are going through,
Yeah.
right? And I think with collaboration comes genuine, like being genuine, right? Um, and also like being trustworthy and truthful and transparent about the process, right? Is and so something also is like I encourage anyone working within, this field, right? Or with this population, right? Like what is like kind of doing that self-reflection, right? What is it within you that's thinking like, oh, this person isn't ready, right? And so there's been times that like I have to self-reflect because maybe I have that feeling of like, oh, I don't know, right? But then I think that's where seeking supervision, consultation, right? And really making it a collaborative process is what kind of takes away those barriers, right? And being ready looks like something different for each person. And so I think there is just a lot of that like self-reflection that has to be had as a clinician or person working in this field to figure out like why am I saying that? Why am I thinking that someone may not be ready? Right. And then that's me, as a person potentially controlling their narrative.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think it just you got to self-reflect.
Yeah, but only 100% of the time. Right. Constantly asking myself, how am I seeing this person? Is there something in my own history?
Right.
Is there something in my own bias? And, we talk about unconscious bias. That goes a lot of different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Like sometimes I remember I'd be in like a treatment team meeting and we would all just acknowledge that we all really liked this one client. Like
Mm-hmm.
we just thought she was so sweet and so kind. It's like, oh, that's interesting that we all have this sort of we would call it a positive bias, right? We want to look at that
Mm-hmm.
too. Everything, every different way I'm looking at a client. And
Yeah.
then we can be truly curious with the person instead of imprinting an idea that I have about them. And, for
Yes.
me, I realized at one point it wasn't about getting rid of these biases. It was about acknowledging them and then
Mm-hmm.
asking what they're creating. And so like for me to
Mm-hmm.
check that and to say, okay, let me, to the best of my ability, set that aside so I can be curious about this unique individual that's beyond any preconceived idea I have about them.
Right, right. And sometimes, we have those innate biases, right? And it may take just some challenging, right, for to reprocess or reprogram the kind of things that we've grown up thinking or being told, the messages, right? That really ingrained socialization. And it takes a lot of like mental energy and effort to challenge those things. But what I think is wonderful is that it's possible. And we see it every day, right? Even with like the idea of, I've interacted with clients who have this idea of like, I'm never going to get better,
Yeah.
right? And that's really hard to think, right? But I think there's ways to gently challenge and bring things in. And I think that's the really beautiful thing about, whether it's, negative cognitions, right? Or just like these biases is that they can be healthily challenged and eventually changed.
Yeah. And we can look
So,
at the point of origin because as you were saying that about this, I may never get better. I think really in my experience and like almost 20 years working in this field, like almost all of our clients on some level feel damaged, broken, or incapable of their own healing. And I think
mhm,
it's our role to like see a different possibility for them, even in the midst of
mhm,
them not maybe being there yet. That doesn't usually, to me, it doesn't usually happen verbally. I don't say to them, well,
mhm,
what if you can heal, or what if you're not broken? It's more about, let me ask questions and be present with them. But there's something powerful just in the witnessing. And
mhm,
I was thinking about all the things I had to unlearn in my life. I was thinking about my grandfather who was born in like 1900 something in the Midwest and like just I loved him and he was overtly racist. Like not
mhm,
nothing subtle about it. And like
mhm,
remembering this like the multiple layers of things and like I hardly ever talk about this, but I was in the very first year of busing, going way back to where I was bused into
mhm,
an inner city school, and what was that like? And like all the stuff that I got to unlearn on my own spiritual journey, but that was definitely heightened starting in this field because I had to ask myself every moment, am I seeing this person? Or am
mhm,
I seeing a version of this person from an unconscious program that isn't even mine? I didn't even put it
mhm.
there, but it's there and it's mine now, my responsibility to work with it.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that spirituality piece is often left out right? As we think about healing, right? And that's why I really love conscious recovery, right? Because it even makes me think of like, how am I being in tune with my spirituality? And then just like being able to broaden the idea of what spirituality is,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's been a really beautiful experience and getting to learn from you, right? And then also translating what I've learned from you into the group spaces of just like bringing in that spiritual piece because it can look so differently for everyone. And I think that circles back to the idea of looking at a person as a whole person, right?
Yeah.
So I really love conscious recovery.
Oh, thank you, Liv.
You're
I love
welcome.
that you love it. And I'm so grateful that you are the one facilitating it at Element Q now because it makes such a big
Yes.
difference. And, conscious recovery is the modality that I created some years back that
Hmm.
it really is spiritually based. And what that
Hmm.
means to me is looking for the essence in the person and, having a
Hmm.
client remembering on some level that essence of who they are. It's not really an outer journey, it's an inner journey. But as you said,
Yeah.
it means so many different things to different people. I learned the hard way.
Ah.
I don't share because a lot of times people think spirituality is a belief. Inevitably, it's a
Hmm.
belief, right? And that's what most people say. What are your spiritual beliefs? But really, it's an experience. And
Hmm.
it's an experience that's way beyond the mind. And I remember a client just pushed me. She was like, what are your spiritual beliefs? What do you believe? And I told her, and then she got really like I could see it was very unsettling for her. And then I realized
Hmm.
this is not about me and my points of view. This is about being
Hmm.
curious for her.
Yes, for sure. And I think it just talks about like, this work is very human,
Yeah.
right? Like there, in a therapy room, there are humans, right? Sitting. There's one maybe who's a therapist and one who's maybe the client, right? And yes, there are power dynamics there. And I think taking a trauma informed approach is really important for like leveling that and acknowledging that, right? And also encouraging autonomy. But at the end of the day, right, like there's two beings, right, who are engaging in a relationship,
Yeah.
right? Like, and that in itself is very powerful, right? And I think for the clinician side, it's just like remembering I'm a human too, right? I have natural, emotional responses and feelings, right? And then knowing that the person who may be showing up as the client, right, is really like pouring their heart and soul out, right, to someone who maybe they're meeting for the first time,
Yeah.
right? And so just like I think I reflect on this field, on this job, and just like what a beautiful experience that is,
Mm.
right? Yeah.
It's also such an honor. It's
Yeah.
such an honor to have said yes or have been chosen or have done the work to become like someone who gets to work in this field. And what I
Yes.
mean by that is like we are witness to a person at perhaps their most difficult and also possibly their most transformational moment in their life where there's this
Hmm.
possibility of seeing themselves in a new and different way or
Yeah.
unlearning or releasing or healing. And it's such a beautiful thing. There's no experience like it that I've ever had.
No.
As a matter of fact, I didn't think I was going to do this work. I was like, I'm going to do my spiritual work. I went back to school for that. And then I
Uh-huh.
accidentally started working in behavioral health. And I fell in love. And what I really fell in love with was witnessing the transformation and realizing like, I'm not doing the transformation, but I have a role in that transformation. And that
Hmm.
having a role in that is so exciting for me and so rewarding.
Yes, I agree. Couldn't agree more.
You talked about something that I wanted to speak a little bit more about, and that is the importance of a team. And I was thinking about, when we have this collective approach where we have different people working with the same client, I was also thinking about it through the holistic lens, right? There's physical,
Hmm.
intellectual, emotional, and spiritual, and each of us gets to play a different role. And a client might resonate with one person or they might have a breakthrough getting acupuncture that like they didn't have in their 3 sessions with the therapist and then they have a moment with the therapist that they would never get in group. So this
Hmm.
collaborative and holistic, I think every treatment center now has on their business card integrative holistic, but I always ask them what
Right.
that means and see what they say.
Right.
I know we're really doing that, so I'd love to hear more about the sort of integrative approach.
Yes, it's really so cool. And before I started working here, I didn't really know of any places, right, that, I also spent time, I trained as a part-time clinician at Monema as well. And so, that's when I was first introduced to this idea of healing someone as like, somatically too, right? And that acknowledgement of how, like the book, body keeps the score, right? How some things we hold. And I think introducing some of that integrative work, right? We have Chinese medicine doctors, we're doing acupuncture, we're doing movement, yoga, sound healing, right? Like, I think it's so cool. And I think it reminds me a lot of, like, I know we have someone who does pelvic floor healing, right? Like, and I know I'm probably missing some things, right? Because there's more, but, just thinking of like how some people, it allows them to really connect with self, or maybe like the ancestral pieces of them that have been neglected, right? And so I think it's just a really cool experience that you could be in group, like you said, you could be an individual, or, receiving acupuncture or cupping and have a very healing experience. And it gets to be shared in all spaces.
Yeah.
And so I think that brings a really unique quality to Element Q for sure.
Yeah, and I also think about it, if you look back in our field, it was primarily mental. I mean, it was primarily in the mind, and a lot of modalities
Yes.
of therapy focus only on like the narrative or the thoughts or the patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very useful. And obviously we do that
Yes.
piece as well. And yet
Mm-hmm.
there's the body, there's the emotions, there's the spirit, there's the essence, there's
Right.
a moment that happens, with a profound connection with another client that doesn't even need to necessarily get spoken to or about. It's just
Yes.
it happens
Yes.
and something shifts internally. And
Mm-hmm.
that's always my goal with conscious recovery. I don't
Right.
want a client to walk out learning something new, but having had experienced something that they're then
Mm-hmm.
curious about.
Yeah. And something I think is important to acknowledge is like the somatic healing, the body healing is not new, right?
Right.
This has been going on in indigenous cultures for so long. And so I think that's important to notice that, like, when we think of westernized medicine, right? Like, it may be like a new thing, right? Like putting it, on a business card or this or that, but like these practices have been going on for a long time. And so I just want to highlight the communities that, that a lot of people are getting some of this information from, and just make sure their voices and their expertise are heard
And
and
it's really
acknowledged.
cool because even a decade ago, this stuff
Hmm.
was a lot of what we're talking about was more fringe in the Western medical model, in the
Hmm.
behavioral healthcare system. And now, like you said, it's like these ancient practices are coming in.
Hmm.
Some
Hmm.
don't realize they are, or they're aware that they are, but thank you for putting voice to that because we're
Hmm.
using, what one might consider to be something new is actually something really old and ancient and
Yes.
proven proven.
Yes.
If I think about Chinese medicine and how many thousands of years, these
Hmm.
pressure points and the acupuncture. And like, I remember being very, very ill at one point, and my friend took me to a doctor. When we walked into an acupuncturist, I was like, I thought we were going to a doctor. I was obviously in my
Hmm.
mind thinking what a doctor was supposed to be. And I had a
Right.
spontaneous healing from the
Yes.
acupuncture. And
Hmm.
I was like, okay, this is real. This is very
Yes.
real.
Absolutely. Yes.
So we're actually winding down to the end of our conversation. In a moment, I'll ask you if you have any closing thoughts, but I just want to say thank you. I've loved this conversation. I feel like, as
Me too.
always, often we just got started, but I feel like we covered some really amazing points. And thank you for your willingness to say yes. And do you
Mhm.
have anything in closing that you'd like to say?
No, I just appreciate the space that you have offered, right, for some of these thoughts and ideas to be heard, right, and not just between you and I, but on a bigger scale.
Yeah.
And so I just appreciate you for holding this space and inviting me into this space. I've had a great
Oh,
time.
well, thank you for saying yes. And everyone,
Hmm.
you know what to do. Like, share, subscribe. If there's someone in your life that you think will resonate with this conversation, please share it with them because that's why we do this. Thank
Yes.
you, everyone. Thank you, Liv, for your wisdom and for your presence. And peace and blessings, everyone. Until the next time. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Element Q podcast. It's an honor to walk this path of healing and transformation with you. Remember, the courage and resilience of those who came before us live on in each of us. Let's continue to carry their legacy forward as we support one another in creating a world filled with love, gentleness, and empowerment. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we're building a brighter future, one story at a time. Until next time, I'm TJ Woodward, and this has been the Element Q podcast.